Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here and listening. Now, last week I chatted to Dr. Richie Kerwin, nutritionist, all about supplements. And it was such an interesting conversation and left me thinking a little bit about what I'm going to do electrolyte wise when I go into an event that I'm doing this weekend. As I did last year, I booked into this thing called Hope 24 last minute. It's an event where you do multiple laps of the same 5 mile route, and you can do it for 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours. And I booked into the 12-hour route mainly so I can go and see my friends in the local gym. I am not planning on keeping going for the full 12 hours. My aim is just to go and do what I can and see how I feel on the day, stop a bit, enjoy myself, and just see what I can manage, because I haven't been training to do like super long distance. So I don't want to injure myself. It's all about feeling good afterwards. But I'm grateful to Dr. Richie Kerwin because I am thinking about my electrolyte strategy. Maybe I just need to focus more on staying hydrated. And the other thing I wanted to say is the week before that podcast episode, I actually had a week off recording. It was so hot in my office that I thought that I would melt if I sat in here. It was over 33 degrees. And I also thought that no one would really notice if I missed a week. And I was wrong, because I did get some messages from you saying, where are you? Where's the next episode? So apologies for that, but I am back with a solo episode today. And it's about a subject that is very important, because I want to talk about exercise with relation to fat loss. Now, you'll likely know, if you've been listening for a while, that I am someone who likes to move. I feel like movement really is part of my life. But the whole idea around exercise with fat loss is probably one of the most muddled areas that's spoken about in the fitness and fat loss space. And it seems like everyone's got an opinion on what you should do in order to help with fat loss exercise wise. They've all got this thing that's definitely going to work. And the thing is, when we actually look at these in detail, not many of them really hold up. So what I'd love for you to do today during this episode is to notice how you've thought about movement in the past, because I think a lot of us have been conditioned to judge it almost entirely by the amount of calories that we burn. You're thinking about how many you burn. You're wondering if it's enough. Have you worked hard enough to earn that meal out? Have you burnt off that cake you've eaten? And what I'd really like to explore with you today is whether we've been asking the wrong questions, because I think movement has a much bigger role to play in the fat loss world than most people realize. It's just not necessarily the reasons that we have been told or we might believe. And I want to start with one of the biggest questions out there about exercise and fat loss, and that is, can I lose weight or lose body fat without exercising at all? And the answer is, well, really, it's yes. There we go, the end. But no, if you are in a calorie deficit, and by calorie deficit, I mean if you're consistently taking in a bit less energy than your body requires, then you will lose body fat. And that can happen whether or not you're going to a gym or doing a run or not. If we're purely talking about creating that calorie deficit, this is where nutrition, the food that we eat, generally has the biggest influence. And this is backed up by research, because when studies compare changing what people eat to exercise changes alone, it's the dietary changes that tend to produce the bigger initial weight loss. And it isn't because exercise isn't effective. It's because the changes that we can make to what we eat are often much bigger than the amount of energy that we burn in a typical workout. And I actually think this is quite reassuring, because I've worked with a lot of women over the years that have had injuries that have meant that they haven't been able to exercise in their normal way. And that can feel quite scary if you've been relying on it for weight loss. But it's nice to know that if you are in that situation, you can still make progress towards your goals without having to push hard and exercise all the time. And also, if you are somebody that has exercised consistently and then felt really disappointed because the scales don't move, and that's the change you've made, then that isn't a personal failing either. It's just what you'd expect if you're only looking at the calories in versus calories out thing. And I don't think this has helped, because apps like MyFitnessPal will kind of reward you for the exercise you're doing and say, you can have this much now. And it is a dangerous road to go down, a slippery path. But obviously, if that was all there was to this, then it would be a very short podcast episode. Because although nutrition is going to be usually what creates the biggest calorie deficit, movement can make the whole process of losing body fat so much easier. And that isn't simply because it burns more calories, although it does. And I don't like to see movement spoken about in that way, because there's so much more to it. But it does burn more energy. But it also, and more importantly, makes you feel stronger and more capable. It changes how much you are naturally moving throughout the day, how well you sleep, how you manage stress, and even some of the decisions that you make afterwards. And these are things we're going to talk about in this episode as well, because this is the area that doesn't get spoken about nearly enough. So if nutrition is generally the biggest influence on creating this calorie deficit that you're looking for when it comes to fat loss, where is movement going to fit in with all of this? Because this is where you can end up on one extreme or the other. You either, I'm just going to exercise off the food that I've eaten, exercise is everything, or you hear that nutrition has the biggest influence and decide that exercise just doesn't matter at all. And neither of these are right. And I think it's also worth remembering that it's not just about fat loss. You don't focus on health just for the length of a program or your fat loss goal. But the first reason for fat loss that movement does matter is a simple one. And it is that when you move more, you do use more energy. And I don't want to skip over this, because I do think that we do need to see the importance of it. If you move and you're more active across the day, you are going to be using more energy across the day too, which means that you can generally eat a little bit more food while still creating the same calorie deficit. And that can be a really big deal for some of you. It can be the difference to a fat loss phase that feels like you're constantly having to restrict, and one that actually feels manageable. If you think about somebody who is sat at a desk all day and you compare that person to somebody who is on their feet, someone who's working from home, they're sitting at a laptop for most of the day, they might naturally end up with 3,000 or 4,000 steps per day. And that's without really thinking about it. That person who is on their feet more, maybe they're working in a shop, chasing around after young children. They might be working in a caring role. They're just generally more active. They might be doing 8,000 or 9,000 steps. And that's before they've even thought about going for a walk or doing any form of workout. And that is quite a big difference in terms of how much energy they're going to be using. And it can be one of the reasons why fat loss feels much harder for some people, even when they might be the same size and weight to start with, and they might be eating the same sort of meals. Everything can look fairly similar on paper, but their day just involves very different amounts of movement. And when I talk about movement, I'm talking more here about NEAT, which I've spoken about before. It's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You don't need to worry about the name, which sounds complicated. It just means any movement that isn't planned exercise. So that could be walking around the house, carrying the shopping in from the car, going upstairs to the loo, standing up to go make yourself a cup of tea, doing a bit of housework, folding, washing, a little bit of gardening, fidgeting while you're on the phone. None of those things feel like exercise, but they all use energy, and it equates to more for most people than any planned exercise does. And I do think this is something that is useful to know, because it can change how you feel about movement in general, because it isn't just going to be the 30-minute workout or the hour you spend exercising. It's about everything else that is happening throughout the day as well. But actually, the interesting thing here is that exercise can have an impact on your NEAT as well. And that's because when you start to feel fitter and stronger, everyday life can often start to feel easier. And you don't think twice about taking the stairs or carrying the shopping in. It isn't going to feel like such a big job. You might choose to walk to the shop because it feels easier now than getting in the car. And none of those things happen because you've told yourself you have to move more. They happen because moving has become easier, which is fantastic. So exercise isn't just using energy while you're doing it. It's often making it easier to stay active during the rest of your day as well. Whoop, whoop. And then there's also like my favorite part of movement, because if we think about those days where you've gone for a walk, think about how you feel once you've been for that walk. Yes, you've used a bit more energy, but it's so much more than that, because you've probably got a clearer head for going out as well. And then you get the ripple effect that comes from that. You might be feeling calmer, and then you're less likely to find yourself just standing in the fridge because of that stressful day. You might find that you sleep a bit better that evening, and that might make you feel more likely to cook dinner rather than ordering a takeaway. The ripple effect from movement that makes you feel good, is huge. And they might not happen every single time that you go out for a walk, but it can happen enough that it's really worth paying attention to. Really start noticing how it makes you feel. Because when movement leaves you feeling better, you're going to be way more likely to go and do it again tomorrow and the next day. And that's one of the reasons that I would say that motivation often comes from action rather than waiting until you're feeling motivated first. The more that movement becomes part of your life and you notice how good it makes you feel and the easier it feels to do, the more likely you are to keep doing it. But that doesn't mean you start with this huge amount. Start small and build up from there. So when I say that movement can make fat loss easier, I'm not talking about just one thing in isolation, the exercise part of it. Yes, it can help because you're using more energy, but it also helps because it's making that everyday movement easier. It's changing how you feel, and it is often changing the decisions that you make afterwards too. It really does go hand in hand with the nutrition changes you're making as well. And for me, that's why movement is such an important place in this conversation. The changes that you're making now are ones that you want to keep. So movement isn't this magic solution when you have a fat loss goal. Movement and nutrition together, doing it in a way that has you feeling calmer and more in control, those are the things that are going to make it easier to stick to long term. And one of the biggest myths that I come across with regards to movement and fat loss is that if some exercise is going to be good for fat loss, then more must be better, mustn't it? More workouts, more cardio in particular, more calories used. And it does sound completely logical. I know, because if movement does help fat loss, surely doing more and more of it is just going to speed things up. But the trouble with this is that our bodies aren't quite that straightforward. And one of the things that we do know from research is that as we increase our exercise, our body often starts compensating in different ways. And sometimes that's because we're genuinely more tired. We might find ourselves sitting down more in the evening without even noticing it, or deciding to drive somewhere that we'd normally walk to because we've already done that workout. And sometimes it can be psychological. Most of you will probably at some point have had a little voice in your head that's saying, you've earned this. And that might be having a bigger portion at dinner or choosing a dessert that you wouldn't normally have. It might be that you're choosing to put your feet up because you did that workout in the morning, because in your head, you have been ticking off the exercise for the day. Choosing then to have a reward isn't a lack of willpower. It's very normal when you've been putting the effort into something for your brain to look for a reward. But the issue with this is that those compensations that you're having can quietly chip away at that calorie deficit that you're trying to create. But there's also genuine hunger that can happen. I have this after my long runs. If I haven't fueled well before or afterwards, I can get to the point where I am ravenous. And that might be later that afternoon, or it might be the following day. I call this the rungeries. And the thing about the rungeries is that there is no calm, sensible decision-making happening here. I really do want to eat everything in sight. And that doesn't necessarily just come from running. That comes from any more intense exercise. And this isn't unusual because research shows that for some people, longer or harder exercise increases appetite, making it much harder to maintain a calorie deficit than they expected. I have spoken to so many women over the years that feel like they are this anomaly because they start marathon training and then end up gaining weight. And that is because we can be genuinely more hungry. And it's so hard once you're at that point to approach that with willpower, but it can also be the psychological element of deserving a bit more as well. But there is one more piece that I'm going to add to this, and that is the recovery from doing more. If you are constantly trying to squeeze in another workout before you've properly recovered from your last one, you can end up feeling permanently tired, moving less because everything feels like more effort, and then craving those quick sources of energy, those high fat, high sugar foods, because your body is just asking for fuel and it wants quick fuel. So ironically, the thing that you were doing because you thought it was going to speed up fat loss can sometimes make it feel much harder. But I do want to be very careful here, because I definitely don't want you to listen to this and hear me saying that exercise doesn't work or that you should do less, because that is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm trying to say is that there is this difference between exercising to support your health and fat loss alongside that as a byproduct, and then chasing these bigger numbers because you feel that more is always going to be better. There's even a theory in exercise science called constrained energy expenditure. And you definitely don't need to remember the name. I had to go and look it up as well. But the idea behind it is very interesting, because rather than our daily energy expenditure increasing in this perfectly straight line when we add in more exercise, what happens is our body appears to compensate in different ways, which I briefly touched on already. But it might mean that we're reducing movement later in the day. It might be that it's increasing our appetite. And that is why doubling up on training isn't going to double up on fat loss. Our body is much cleverer than we give it credit for. And that might be reassuring for some of you as well, because you might feel like you've worked really, really hard with your exercise, thrown yourself into loads of different things, and then felt disappointed when the scales didn't seem to reflect that. Because it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means that your body is smarter than you think. So it's not an argument for doing less. It's an argument for doing an amount of exercise that your body can actually recover from, enough that you're increasing your energy expenditure where you can, and you're getting fitter and stronger. Although I do think, if you've been strength training for a while, your goal might be maintaining that strength. But really, we want to make sure that you're leaving that exercise, that workout, without dreading your next session, or that you're not needing days and days to recover from it every single time. So if movement is leaving you exhausted, it's probably not helping you as much as you think. I'd much rather you found a way of moving that you could genuinely imagine doing in 6 months, 6 years, 15 years, whatever. Because when movement becomes something that is going to fit into your life and makes you feel good, a habit you want to keep, that's when all of those benefits that we've spoken about and we see people talking about really do seem to add up. We get that real ripple effect from movement. Now, I do get asked a lot about steps. I will encourage people to look at their steps if they've got a watch. And it might be that you've listened so far to everything I've said, and quite reasonably, you might be thinking, well, Ruth, you have just told me that moving more means I use more energy. So surely I should just keep increasing my steps. And yes, this is true to a point. I may well encourage you to increase your steps from where they are. So let's imagine that you're someone who is currently averaging around 8,000 steps a day. If you increase that to say 10 or 12,000, are you likely to use more energy? The answer is yes. Is that then going to help with fat loss? Quite possibly, yes. But the place where the conversation gets interesting is, instead of asking whether those extra 4,000 steps work, because they quite possibly will, I'd be much more interested in looking or asking what they look like in your life. So for one person, they might be the nicest part of their day. They finish work, they stick on a podcast, take the dog out, clear their head, and come back feeling better than they did when they went out. Great. Fantastic. I would be encouraging you to push for those extra steps as much as you can. For someone else, though, those same 4,000 steps happen at 10 o'clock at night, where they're marching around the kitchen trying to get it to hit that 12,000 mark. They've been really busy all day. They're exhausted. They're getting frustrated. Somebody else, those same 4,000 steps might be happening at 10 o'clock at night. They're marching around their kitchen trying to get it to tick over to 12,000. They've been busy all day. They've been in meetings. They're exhausted, and they're getting really frustrated because they've only reached 10,500 steps. And now that step target is running their evening. So same number of steps, but completely different experiences. And the second person is still going to be using more energy, but they're also spending more time doing something that they really don't want to be doing. They're feeling more stressed. They're not feeling recovered. And when they're feeling stressed and they're feeling tired, they might find that their hunger is increasing. They also might, importantly, start resenting the whole process and wanting to give up altogether because they feel like they failed every day when they don't hit that target, which was never realistic for the life that they're currently living. And that's why I don't think that there's one perfect step target. I'd rather that you had a baseline that comfortably fits into normal life. It might be that you're pushing for a little bit more, but nothing drastic. So maybe on a normal busy Tuesday with meetings, you can hit 6,000, 6,500 steps. Maybe that's you, might be more. But then you have another number that you can push for on those quieter days where there's less going on. So you've got your minimum and you've got a push goal. And the other thing when it comes to health that we should just highlight here with regards to steps is that when they look at the studies around how many steps we should do, the goal of 10,000 steps is just a random number chosen by a marketing campaign around the Tokyo Olympics. It was chosen because it was believed it was achievable for most people. And they were selling a step counter. But regardless, the biggest improvements when we look at the studies are when people go from a very low number of steps to a moderate number of steps. That's where you're going to see the biggest impact on overall health. And the improvements start to come quite soon. So if you're somebody that's hardly moving during the day and you start doing 4,000, you'll see marked improvements and then it continues. And then I believe it peters out. The improvements for our health aren't there so much after 12,000. But if you're regularly getting 7,000 steps a day, and you find that you can manage your fat loss, manage life, and you might have the odd day where you're getting 12 or even 15,000, that's quite normal. And that is okay. If you feel like you can easily, without causing much stress, up your steps a little bit more, and it's something you could enjoy doing, then it's a great place to focus, especially when you have a fat loss goal. And when I think about focusing on numbers, because that's basically what we're doing when we're looking at our steps, instead of going out and enjoying a walk, we're just focusing on hitting one specific number. And I see this in so many areas. You know, people will look at the calories they burned on their watches. And I did this with my running. I'd turned running into a stressful experience. I've said on my Instagram before that I managed to ruin a perfectly good hobby because I was always running, looking at my watch, focusing on my pace, thinking about people that were looking at me on Strava or those other apps. And in 2022, when I'd lost some fitness, this felt harder because I was always going out and pushing myself, but not thinking about how it made me feel. My recovery was awful. I was resenting it. It felt like something I should do because I have to, rather than something that I actually wanted to do. And that goal that I created, which is to go out and come back feeling better than I did when I left, is one that I still have today. And the thing about this whole approach to running is I did improve with my running, but I've improved in a different sort of way because the improvements came from my consistency. The improvements came from improved recovery because I wasn't pushing harder than I could. I was listening to my body about what I could actually manage that day, because some days I would walk a hill and some days I might be able to run a bit more. And I still do it like that now. In fact, I have taken this week as more of a recovery week, which is something before I would have struggled with, because if it was a day where I'd normally feel like I should run, I'd try and run regardless of my own energy and my own tank and where it was. But I do want to talk to you now, not just about running, because running is just one thing that I enjoy doing. The other thing that I enjoy doing, and I think is so important to try and include as much as we can in whatever way we can, is strength training. But where does that fit with fat loss? And I actually want to take on a myth here. It's more of an over-exaggerated claim than a myth, but it's that belief that when we build muscle, your metabolism is just going to go up and then fat loss basically sorts itself. I've heard people saying you're burning calories while you're eating ice cream when you've got more muscle. And it can be a really good way of getting you excited about lifting something heavy. But I do want to give you the honest version rather than the really exciting one, because I think informed knowledge is always key. So muscle tissue does burn slightly more energy than fat tissues, but really annoyingly, the difference is quite small. So gaining 2 kilograms of muscle isn't going to suddenly let you eat several hundred calories a day without any consequences. And if anyone is saying this, they're likely just exaggerating those claims a little bit. This isn't to say that strength training doesn't matter for fat loss, because it does matter. It can make a huge difference, but just not for that reason. It's not for the reason that I'll see said again and again on Instagram. So we've talked already about how getting fitter tends to make you move more throughout the day without even really trying. And strength is doing that too. What I notice more with strength specifically is the confidence it gives you, that feeling of being more capable, lifting something heavy without having to ask someone to help, getting the lid off the jar, getting up off the floor, playing with your kids or your grandkids without needing help, carrying all of those shopping bags in from the car in one go without needing multiple trips is incredible. And none of this is about the calories it burns. It's about not feeling limited by your own body. And that really changes what you're willing to take on through the rest of the day. So having more muscle isn't really moving the needle much when it comes to metabolism, a little bit, but what it moves is your capability and that confidence. And then you don't feel restricted in what you can do. And that is where the real metabolic advantage sits, because we are just going to be moving and taking on more. There's also, obviously, the bone density and joint stability side of things, which is going to become more and more relevant as we go through midlife, through our 40s and 50s and beyond. That isn't about fat loss, I know, but it is part of why strength training is so important, regardless of what the scale says. Because, say it again, I've said it already, but health isn't just for the length of a program. Now, another myth that I want to take on is the idea that cardio is for burning fat and weights are just for building muscle, as if they're doing two completely separate jobs. They're really not. So cardio is going to contribute to your overall energy expenditure, and it's very good for your heart health and your fitness. And strength training matters too in fat loss, but not necessarily in quite the same way. And it's got one particularly important reason, and that is that it helps you hold on to the muscle that you already have. Because when you're in a calorie deficit, your body doesn't only want to lose the fat that you've got. Annoyingly, it'd be good if it only targeted fat. Given half a chance, it's going to be quite happy to lose some of your muscle along the way as well. And muscle is actually quite expensive to maintain. Your body's quite happy to offload it if it thinks it isn't needed. So strength training is one of the strongest things that you can do to send that signal to your body that you actually want to hold on to this. You need this in day-to-day life. So please keep it. And it not only matters for body composition, it matters for how you function, for how you age, for independence later on, for your mobility, being able to do things that you want to do without it being a struggle. So let's hold on to that at any stage. But it does matter more at this stage, because muscle loss tends to speed up through our 40s and 50s, particularly around perimenopause and menopause. That's a lovely, lovely thing being a woman, isn't it? So if you're in a deficit and doing no strength training at all, then you may well be working against a trend that's already happening in the background. So doing some form of resistance training isn't going to completely reverse that, but it is going to push back against it. And over the years, it's going to make a big difference. The other thing is that if you haven't been consistently strength training before and you do start doing it, you can still build some muscle during this time as well. So I don't want you to see it as cardio versus weights for fat loss. I think it's more useful to think of them as doing different jobs, but both can help support the same goal. So cardio is going to help your general fitness, your heart health, and strength training is going to help you to preserve what you've built while you lose some body fat. They're just different jobs. So I do want to spend a small moment on DOMs, because I think they can be responsible for a lot of you quitting more than anything else that we have spoken about today, particularly in that strength training world. And DOMs, if you haven't come across them, it's just a term. It stands for delayed onset muscle soreness. It's that ache that you get a day or two after you've done something new, some form of exercise. Maybe you've had a change in your workout block, but you're just doing more than usual. And it is completely normal. Your muscles are just adapting to the demand that they haven't had in a while. But there is a belief that soreness equals effectiveness, and that if you're not properly wrecked the next day, the workout itself just didn't count. And I do understand where that comes from. It can feel quite nice sometimes to have a little bit of an ache, like, oh, I've been working hard, but it's not accurate, and it can work against you, because when that soreness becomes extreme, and by extreme, I mean to the point where you can barely get up the stairs, you're struggling to sit down on the loo, you're wincing, that's not a badge of honor. That's something that can genuinely reduce how much you move for several days. So given everything that we've said today about the value of just everyday general movement, that would go directly against what we want for you. And I know that this can stop you before you've even properly started, because that first strength session can mean that your muscles are going, and you'll get DOMS. But if you've not had that before, you might think that something is wrong, that you've hurt yourself. And so you don't go back for weeks. And then when you do go back and you've lost that adaptation, it happens all over again. It becomes a cycle that means that you go to the gym, it hurts so much, you don't go back. Then when you do go back, the same, and you can think that there's something wrong with you. There's actually a name for what tends to happen the next time round, which is the repeated bout effect, which is really just a fancy way of saying the first time is almost always the worst. Do the same session again a few days later, and the soreness is nearly always less. And by the third or the fourth time, it's barely noticeable. So if a first session has put you off, please don't let it. That first bit of soreness really is the worst, and it does get easier, which is why we just need to do what we can. You might reduce the intensity a little bit when you go back in, but just keep on going. So the thing I want you to remember is that the best program isn't going to be the one that leaves you feeling the most destroyed. It's the one that allows you to keep going, to keep showing up. So ease in more gently than you might think you need to, especially at the start, and then let that soreness settle before you push harder. If you do get sore, then gentle movement can really help you feel better sooner. And what most people will tend to do is go for a walk or just some easy movement to help warm up, because you'll notice the muscles start to feel a bit better then. But you also want to focus on getting plenty of protein, plenty of hydration, sleep to aid the recovery, and then some stretching perhaps later in the day. Fortunately, actually, stretching doesn't have loads of strong evidence behind it, but it can feel like it's nice. It can feel like you're doing something. And just a quick one, being somebody who is quite a heavy sweater, I glisten, sparkle, whatever, it's a lot. I have heard people tell me that is a sign that I'm working harder, that it's a measure of how much body fat I might lose. This is just your body's cooling system. That really is all it is. And how much you sweat can depend on the heat, the humidity, your fitness level. But I think for me, it's really genetics as well. Some of you will sweat buckets during not very much, and some of you will hardly sweat during what you might think is a proper hard session. And neither of them tell you anything about how many calories you've burned or how much energy is being used. You can get stronger and fitter and healthier while barely sweating at all. You can also sweat through an entire session and still gain weight if what you're eating outweighs what you're using. So if you've ever judged a workout by how drenched you were afterwards, just try and let that one go. It's more telling you about the temperature regulation, not fat loss. Now, you might notice that I just keep coming back to the same point throughout the whole podcast in a slightly different way each time. It's the same whether I've been talking about calories, about movement, about steps, strength, soreness, my own running. The question underneath all of this has never been, how do I burn the most? It's become something more like, how do I make this something I actually want to keep doing? If I think about my running, it wasn't really about running at all, was it? It was more about what happens when you stop asking how you feel and start asking what the number says instead. How fast you're going, your step count, the calories you've burned, the recovery score, whatever badge your watch has decided to give you that day. Those numbers can be useful, but the moment they become the only goal, rather than just a bit of useful information, something mentally can shift, and not necessarily for the better. Because once a number becomes the goal, exercise stops becoming something you do for yourself and it starts becoming something that you feel like you have to do. And that's where you can start to lose interest, start dreading it, start resenting it. And it's something that you should be enjoying. It's something that should give you more than it takes. So if there's one thing that I want you to take from today's episode, it's this, right? Movement can support fat loss, but not just because it burns some huge number of calories, but because when you find ways of moving that make you feel healthier, stronger, calmer, and more capable, you're far more likely to keep doing it for years and years, not just weeks. That consistency, more than any one single session or any step count or any calorie, is where change will actually happen. Change becomes a byproduct of what you're doing. And we really want to do it in a way that has us feeling good now and in the future. And this is why the focus over the summer is the Move Your Mood challenge inside my membership, because it's built around shifting our focus away from these numbers. And instead, the question becomes, how did that make me feel? So the goal, and the only goal, is doing one form of movement each day that has the sole purpose of feeling better afterwards. And so far, members have been sharing things like doing a kitchen disco when the kettle's boiling, blasting out their favorite tunes during a normal workout, or taking a new route when they're going for their walk, or even choosing to have company. And I've definitely been taking this challenge to heart as well, and taking some time to go out on a walk, but not just have my headphones on, but instead take them off for a bit, enjoy the scenery, listen to the birds, and just really focus on feeling good. And what I notice again and again is that, like myself, when people are focusing on movement that makes them feel good, they do just start doing it more. So by the end of the summer, this shouldn't be something that they finish. It should be a habit that they've got, that they take with them, so that movement really does just feel part of life. So that's my take on movement and fat loss. And I would love it if you head out for your next workout or your next walk and you just ask yourself, how can I make this more enjoyable? Have a goal of feeling better afterwards. Shift that perspective. And if you manage to do that, then winner, winner. Now, if you want some support making fat loss fit with life, if you're ready to move in a way that has you feeling good, then do come and join us inside the Ruth MacFit membership. We are doing the Move Your Mood challenge over the summer. Less of a challenge because it should feel good. And we would love to have you with us. Now, I'm going to put details of the challenge in the show notes. And also you can head to my website to find out more as well. And as always, if you have enjoyed this episode, do make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and leave perhaps a 5-star review to let others know that you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you as always. I cannot wait to the next episode. I'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.